I think of these, sort of innovation arenas emerging that are a little bit like these massive multiplayer online games that have sort of mechanics that exist and are codified into the system and they're digitally transacted in a trustful way. But the way in which you show up to play the game and the way in which the game will get played is almost not even predictable. And because of how complex and adaptive it is, that the person who designed the game is effectively also playing the game by trying to respond to the way in which the players play the game. And you just end up with something sort of beautiful and vibrant. And the level of creativity that can emerge from that, I think, is fascinating.
Okay, Bryan, thanks for joining us on the podcast. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Robbie.
Perfect. So you're here with your company, Sobol. Um, where are you calling in from?
I'm in Wellesley, Ontario, so just outside the Waterloo tech ecosystem.
Definitely. So it seems like more and more companies are coming out of there. It's a nonstop generator of technology. Are you from the area or did you move in?
I moved in. I went to school at University of Waterloo, but and then have lived in the area for, I guess it's coming up on a decade now.
Nice, cool. So tell me, Sobol, one of the descriptions you have it is you're trying to move from the future of work to the future of play. I kind of love that tagline. I had a chance to go through your website, previously before the episode starts, and it's a kind of a cool concept. I'm really intrigued. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the future of work to future of play is really a North Star for us in the sense that when we look at work today, and there's all those engagement stats and all the icky discussions about how work feels like work and, what is it that's getting in the way of it maybe feeling a little more like play, a little more fun, and all the beautiful productivity benefits that come from when we're fully engaged in having fun. And so I think that is the North Star. That's the place we want to go. And then the journey we're on is basically just unpacking what are the barriers to that, and continuing to ask the five whys when we step on each of those, and sort of build a path towards that future, and also be a bit of a flag bearer to attract others because there's no way we're building that all by ourselves.
No, I love this. So the future, the work to play, right? Especially that, like, one of the aspects of like entrepreneurship that really drives people to it, it's like if because they control the workflow, they get to enjoy the work more,
Yeah.
right? Like one of the draws of that is there. But when you work for somebody else, one of the benefits is that you no longer, the onus is not on you. You have your task outlined for you. Someone's managing you. Someone's taking care of you. So it's like you know how your days are kind of regulated. But at the same time, that takes the fun out of things, right? Like there was like I forget what the author was. I think it might have been the 4 Hour Work Week. Tim Ferriss
Yep.
talking about how like this 4 hours of productivity, hyper productivity that most people are each week. This flow state you go into. It really comes out of like when you really enjoy what you do, right? When you have a depth of knowledge in the particular field, and you can like get into this mode of like performing. So play, I think, is like it's a misnomer because we think of play as like it's something that you waste time on, video games or like sports or like something you do externally. But when we put play and into work together, I think we get something magical because that's some creative elements come out of it, right? And what are your thoughts on this? Like, what does that mean for you, work and play?
Yeah, I mean, you're 100%, on point there with your description. When we look at play and how we play and how we get into flow state, and how productivity and things, productive outcomes can come from that. And people do sort of just think of play as, oh, this is how I blow off steam, or, this is a completely unproductive use of my time. But the truth is when we were children, we were playing, we were building stuff, right?
Hmm.
Like, and you, like you said, say when you say a founder, right? A lot of what draws founders to being founders is that sense of autonomy over our work, and that same thing happens when we're playing. We can decide how we're showing up, which fields we're showing up to when we're a kid. It's like, I want to play soccer today.
Hmm.
And so I'm going to go and congregate with the other people who have the soccer ball, and we're going to play soccer. And so, yeah, there's that autonomy of what game I'm playing that a founder often has control over. And, am I playing today? What position am I playing? All of these little sort of simple things. And when it comes to play, so in addition to that sort of autonomy that a founder often seeks that can give you the opportunity to orient yourself towards your passion so that you can get into that flow state and have fun while you're working. The other opportunity that exists here is when we play, there's a mastery that happens. When we pick up a new, I don't know what it's like for you, but when I pick up a new hobby or a new sport or I start playing a new video game, there is a thrill
Mm.
to that experience of increasing the scope of what you're trying to take on and the scope of the challenge. And so in addition to that autonomy, there's sort of the scope of what you're doing, and leveling up and pursuit of mastery for the sake of mastery and the joy that comes from learning that new thing and getting better and better at it and being able to do more and more and more with it. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's two types of joy that comes from play, right? Like the newness of something, like trying something new that's kind of fun, like, picking up a new game. It might not be the best game because it's new. You're kind of discovering what you can do in it. That's the enjoyment. But also, there's a sense of play when you have mastery or something. You play like 100,000 hours, like 100 hours into a game, and then you know how it works and you know how to operate, and and that sense of mastery gives you kind of joy out of it. So another aspect. How do we take that and put it into work?
yeah, well, I mean, I think we can borrow from this analogy, and there's a reason why play has been that North Star for us, and it's because, well, let's just take a look at play at a highly complex level. Massive multiplayer online gaming seems to be a
Mm.
pretty good place to look for this in the analogy, and so when we look at massive multiplayer online game, it's not a simple game. It doesn't cap out very quickly. And the level of complexity that is present, I think, is a good mirror for the kind of complexity that exists in sort of the work and market environments that we operate in. And there's the opportunity there to explore, play, join and collaborate with others as we play in a more complex way, and to take on sort of bigger and bigger things together. And I think that there's an opportunity to borrow from that and many of the mechanics that exist there. And not only that, to if you're a game developer, you're on the hook to make your game good. And so the rules by which we play, I think, is something we almost sort of have defaulted into a particular game we play today and a way in which we play it. And I love the gaming ecosystem as a place where there is a role in the design of the game. And that well-designed games attract people to play them. And so when we use this analogy and think of it in that way, it's like, what game are we currently playing? What game do we wish we were playing, and how might we borrow from the beautiful marketplaces of games in massive multiplayer online gaming, to sort of say, there should be incentive structures to build better games to play and attract people to play them.
Hmm. So, so my question here is, right, like, oftentimes people talk about separating work and play, right? Like it being important. Like work should be work. Work is like what I do, and play is something that you do to like unwind, right? This is like the old modality of things. But now, especially with working from home and the pandemic and all this kind of things, there's less lifestyle balance. It's less about like work life balance and more like work life integration, where
Hmm.
everything's kind of like interwoven together, right? So, when work becomes play and becomes like it kind of sucks you in. What does that do for life, right? Like, how do we integrate life and work together? Are those challenges you think about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about that challenge right now. Like, my children are at home learning because of the Canadian lockdown with the COVID pandemic. They're downstairs online learning. I'm up here, recording a podcast, and we're trying to figure out the logistics of my child working on this assignment downstairs to build an amusement park, or blueprints for amusement park. I'm up here trying to talk about what disruption in the future of work looks like with you. So
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's already here for many,
Mm.
or at least there's factors in life right now which have accelerated this. And I think my natural inclination towards this is, yes, it's a problem, but all forms, like, work is is already, sort of been facing this challenge for quite some time.
Mm.
And, one would argue that one's hobby and play also has always had to find a way to integrate into the way. So like, my natural inclination on this one is like, yeah, it's been this way. It's always going to be this way. And each person is going to have to make choices about their values and their balance. And what's important, I think, is that I'm going to want to play a game that is styled in such a way that it matches my values and the way in which my family unit, is trying to find that balance. And so
Mm.
when we increase the diversity of the ways in which we can play the game, I can choose how I want to show up and which game I'm playing. And whereas today, I think sometimes there was a one size fits all that needs to continue to diversify. So I don't know. I think that kind of leads into that. Yes, it was here. It was always here. And maybe we just need more t-shirt sizes.
I love this because the past few nights, actually, for the past like 4 or 5 nights, I've been up till like 4 a.m. trying to work out on a new project, a product that we're launching. And for me, it's like I don't even see the time. Like some days,
Yeah.
I don't even eat because like I'm just like in that mode, right? Like whenever I play a game, especially if, I'm like an addict. I have an addictive personality. If I'm doing something, I'm really into it.
Yeah.
Everything life just blends away from me, right? Like if I'm gaming, if working on a project, like everything just kind of tunes out, and I'm just in that moment. Just time just kind of flies by. And my wife was talking about this, like, how are you staying till 4 a.m.? Like she's yelling at me like it's irresponsible. Whereas for me, I'm like, no, like I'm in my zone. Like, why
Yeah.
not squeeze in like these 60 hours in 4 days and just like roll this out rather than spread it out over 2 weeks? Like you can learn faster, you can deploy faster, and then once it's deployed, now you have other time to spend on other things, right? I'd rather obsessively focus on aspects of my life like in like clumps rather than spread it out over long periods of time, because you get to learn faster, you get to deploy faster, you're in that zone of like creative juices flowing, right? And
Yeah.
I think in a lot in life, like especially our infrastructure of society right now, it kind of stamps down this game aspect, this fun aspect of life, right? Like I remember in high school, for instance, like I was the quintessential entrepreneur, hated school, right? Thought it was a prison, couldn't wait to
Hmm.
get out, skipped
Yep.
school, like had horrible grades, until I met this one teacher, Miss Grace Price, my grade 10, grade 11, grade 12 science teacher. She's the one that got me into sciences. I love sciences all the time, but what she did was she created something called price tags, which is coupons for marks that you can win. You answer a question in class, you participate, you do these different things, and she'll give you these coupons, and you can deploy it on any assignment test you want. And you can group them together, go to the front, like, I want to put 10 points to my midterm, and
Yep.
your marks go up. And it was such like a like a lo-fi way of hacking my mind. I went from being the back of the class, like bored, looking up the ceilings, trying to skip school, to be like, now center from the middle to the front of the board. I'm like, I want to win this game, right? And one of the things she also did was she also did a printout. I think it was against school policy too, but she did it anyways. She printed out a list of marks, right, and listed everyone's marks by student number, not by name, by student number. So if you know your student number, you can go and find your mark, and in order of highest to lowest. And she'll update it each week. And then now it's a leaderboard, right? Like I'm an addicted gamer. I'm like, okay, now you can hack this system with coupons, so that you can win these coupons. All I need to play this game is knowledge, right? And then there's a list I can win, right? And then I have enemies, these nerds at the front that always seem to know what they want. I want to take them down, right? And she hacked this moment to me, and that's what really got me into school, right? It wasn't anything different. The same teaching, the same subject matter, all of this, the methodology,
Yep.
it was the key factor that made me super interested. And because of that one teacher, because of that methodology, I ended up getting into one of the most the hardest programs to get into is neuroscience at UFT, right? For me, I think back at this and it's like that was the moment that, like, if it wasn't for that teacher, wasn't for that, I wouldn't have done this. So I always think about this gamification. We hear about this a lot. We want to gamify these things. Mostly we hear about apps, consumer apps, things like that. But in work situations, people are trying to think about this too. How can we break tasks down into smaller components? How can we gamify this? How can we make this better? Right. And I've put a lot of thought into this myself in the company environments I've worked in the business I've run. How do we gamify and make it more fun? Right.
Yeah.
Like if you look at the most successful people, whether in investing or like in entrepreneurship or sports, like they always talk about, playing a game. Like they're playing a game, right? Like investing is a game, right? The business is a game, right? Like this athleticism is a game, right? And like that fun aspect is what really drives them because
Yeah.
it's taking down challenges, right? In these concepts, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, the act of playing is what they love, right?
mm,
It's not whether they're, not whether even they're winning or losing, per se. It's like you ask them, well, yeah, but you've had some massive losses. If you were talking about that investment scenario, you've had massive losses. You've almost been down and out. You've blown up your accounts multiple times, and you're like, yeah, but I'm addicted to this particular game and the way it plays and how my mind engages while I'm playing it, and I'm just like, I gotta go. And so I think the mechanics are everything. We all like to play different games, and I'd argue that we are always playing a game, as you're kind of pointing out here. And we just often aren't sort of looking at it through that lens. I mean, the other classrooms that you weren't engaged in, they were playing a game too. It had an incentive structure. You were just like, I'm not down with this game. I don't want to play this one.
yeah.
All of a sudden another teacher comes along, puts a twist on the mechanics of the game, and all of a sudden you're like, yes, this game, I like this kind, And so I think that's a really important aspect of this. Is just understanding, like you said, many of us we're playing a game, but are we aware of it? And as we become aware of it, do we also become aware of our preferences of how we like to play? And I think work is the same. If we take a look at the different work environments and work cultures we've worked in over the period of our career, it's just like the education analogy you're bringing up. They vary. They have different incentive structures, different ways in which the game is played, different reputation systems. Right, that's a big part of a gaming component. In a socialized game or a massive multiplayer online game, there's repetition and points and skills and all of these
Hmm.
sorts of things. And I think they all show up in the workplace today.
So Brian, what game are you in?
What game am I playing? I love, like, personally, the type of game I like playing, and the one that gives me a rush and gets me into the flow state is thinking, like, really sort of mind-bending, interesting ideas about how the world can change.
Mm,
Um, but I don't like playing that game if it stays in this sort of academic realm. Like, for me, I immediately want to start to translate that into some sort of progressive set of experiments or an on-ramp to the big vision. And like, I will play that game in almost any market space, on almost any idea, as long as I get this weird sort of tingle about the idea and its transformative effects, and how I believe that's a better world. That's a world I want to live in, and I have the skills or the abilities or the experiences or the network in some way to go, okay, and I'm getting excited about sitting down and planning the first step or the first few steps, and that's the game I want to play for the rest of my life.
I completely agree with that, and I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs are like that too. Like there's a difference between an entrepreneur and a serial entrepreneur, and I've noticed these key differences. And the
Hmm.
entrepreneur has found something that they love, that they want, or like an opportunity they want to drive. But serial entrepreneurs, they're addicted to they love ideas, they love working
Yeah,
on things.
yeah.
No, I've literally like one of my favorite people is Matthew Human from New Vote. He's been on our podcast a few times. He's working on a really hard problem, right? Like digitizing democracy, and he's working on this, out of Kitchener for about like 3-4 years now, right? And like
Nice.
and has this great product. He's getting a lot of attention, but then he'll have like 3-4 other ideas. He'll like, I want to do this too, I want to do that, and and like, I've like, in the 2 years I've known him, he's wanted to start like 2-3 other companies, right,
Yeah,
around these things. And we look at Elon Musk and like, how does this one person have all these companies around it? And it's because they have discovered the mechanics of how to play their game really well, and
yeah,
all they're doing is deploying that. Right, for them it's fun, and the mechanics behind it is that. Like, if you look at like Warren Buffett, for him money does mean something different from the rest of us. Money is like a unit of play for him, right? Where like, it's not a consumption, it's not a tool of consumption, it's a tool of play, right? Like, where it's like, oh, I can use this to do this, I use a unit of scale to do this, right?
yes, yeah.
So yeah, so speaking of this, going back to our methodology, right? Like, what drove you to your project right now?
Oh yeah, yeah. No, that's so. I mean, it's been sort of like very, very incremental and very progressive. So I started out as a mechanical engineer back in the day, and it's because I thought innovation lived in engineering, and that was what I had been told in the sort of the high school environment of trying to select your career via selecting what university you're going to go to. And so it was University of Waterloo for mechanical engineering, and um, as I started to take on classes, I had a lot of trouble in the class environment, and I was saved by the co-op term or the internship experience that existed at University of Waterloo. Going out every 4 months into the real world and seeing what actual applied engineering looks like, that was interesting, and it was interesting because of the human component. I just hadn't been able to put my finger on that at that point in time. There was something about when you put the human dynamics into the environment of trying to create something together that was magical. Fast forward, I graduate. I don't really still know, how to apply this, and ended up joining a passenger rail consultancy. It was a very small team, and that's kind of what attracted me because I noticed that I liked working in smaller teams during my cooperative education terms because I had that greater degree of autonomy. And a small team had to try and figure out how to leverage a small number of people to get something big done. And so this group was awesome because, straight out of school, they were giving me a lot of autonomy and a fair bit of scope relative to my experience level. I was flying all over North America working on passenger rail projects. We used to joke that we were kind of like Ghostbusters for trains. If something was going wrong on a project or procurement or rollout or something, we often were getting involved. And at first, I again had this misconception that I was supposed to take my technical skill sets and be innovative in this environment of working alongside governments and these other companies. And I was floored at first of all how dysfunctional the organizations were that I was participating in, and how most of the problems that were emerging had nothing to do with the technology. And in fact, most of the things that were in place were impeding the ability for technology to be used in some sort of innovative fashion, whether it was the code of federal regulations or lobbyist groups that were on the airline lobby side and didn't want high-speed rail systems to, net North America together, and like some of our European and Asian counterparts. And so I was just floored by this and eventually somewhat disillusioned by sort of corporatism and bureaucracy and the total lack of innovation. And that's when I became enamored with startups. It was around the time my wife started to do her own, business, and set up a brick and mortar operation. And I was just addicted to wanting to participate in that act with her, and became sort of addicted to entrepreneurship, reading up, a ton on the tech ecosystems and how they were evolving. And, having come from Waterloo, it made sense to go back to Waterloo and start to explore these ideas. I really wanted to start my own startup and dive right in. And I had a friend who was working in a startup come along and say, hey, you've got like the idea of the week or the business plan of the week. He's like, maybe you should embed yourself in one of these and learn what it's like. And
Hmm.
and sort of brought forward this. He's like, here's this option. Your partner just opened up, a business and is feeling like she's taking some risk. You keep the stable job, but go work for a startup. And there's this cool, role in startups called product management, where you get to do some of these things that seem so passionate about doing. And so that brought me to Myovision in Waterloo for the early days of their journey. So they're in the smart city space. They were working on Internet of Things before it was a buzzword. They were using machine vision to try and count cars and get traffic counts in a real-time way before neural networks had really kind of become a breakthrough. And so it was really fascinating, as they're deploying IoT infrastructure before Amazon even has their beautiful packages, where you just push a button and, you can spin up services related to running an IoT network. Of things. And so it was just amazing culture though. And this is where I was like, yes, this is what I want to participate in, this sort of rapid growth, wear tons of hats, move around where you can apply value, talk to people what you're passionate about doing, and then they're like, yes, please, thank you, go work on that. And that there was just something amazing happening, and I became again more interested in the people dynamics of the place. Like, how teams form on new initiatives and move quickly, getting product to market, how they build trust amongst one another and actually can collaborate effectively and efficiently versus ending up in meeting fatigue and getting nothing done. And as we started to scale up, I became fascinated with the organizational behavior of this hierarchy of managers and watching the bureaucracy I had come from creeping into the startup and thinking, this doesn't feel good. Something's about to lose its sort of beautiful thing. And so I started to go down a rabbit hole at that point on how what people are out there experimenting with new models for
Mm.
organizing that could maintain what we saw as a beautiful behavior when the team is like less than 100 people. That scrappy, flat, agile startup like thing, and so I just started reaching into different things, and it led me into some of the standards like scaled up agile frameworks and trying to understand how all that works, and also some of the sort of more interesting ones like Holacracy is the sort of the cutting edge of like self-managed managerless teams, and some of the research surrounding organizations that were playing with this, Zappos probably being one of the most famous.
Hmm.
And I just started to become more and more fascinated with these decentralized remote working, truly flat in the sense that they don't have management paradigms. They have like governance and economic paradigms
Yeah.
inside the business. And it's like, whoa, the free market economics and the guidance of the legal structures that leave me a free citizen and get me excited as an entrepreneur and budding entrepreneur at the time. I was like, holy smokes, we could do some amazing things if we start to infuse some of these protocols and frameworks and allow people to move in the system on their own accord. And so that's what led me down the rabbit hole, experimenting initially within Myovision around how do we do this. And one of the biggest problems is sort of information. You have to have, when something's moving really quickly, you have to have a sort of a source of truth of how it's moving in order to maintain trust in it. And you do that at the small scale just inside your own head and the relationships you have with people. It's like I know the 80-ish people here on some level, or at least know a person who knows the person, and I start to build trust on a very sort of human and visceral level. And as things start to scale up, I need something else I can trust. And an org chart does a great job of that. So and so reports to so and so reports to so and so, and the stability and rigidity of it creates a structure, and I can try to anchor myself into that. And if we were going to try and rip that out or replace it with something else, we had to be able to see it in some tangible way. So we need to be able to map this organization and watch how it was changing. And so this is sort of the journey that eventually has led me and my fellow co-founders to Sobol. And it sent us down. It's neat. Each of these things ends up on a rabbit hole, opens up another rabbit hole, and it eventually led us to the blockchain ecosystem, because a lot of when we were doing customer discovery around these ideas, we noticed that these folks who were working on these decentralized technologies are modeling the behaviors of the technologies they participate in, and so they were in turn trying to create remote first, highly decentralized power structures in their organizations. And we were like, whoa, there's something neat in Conway's law here of like, the folks who are working on these technologies and these technologies mirroring. And it reminded us so much of the agile movement where, as things move from hardware to software development, so too the behaviors go from waterfall projects with their Gantt charts and project plans to these rapid iterations of the 20-year journey of changing organization behavior that we call the agile movement. And I think another one's coming. And this is what led us to found Sobol.
Man, you spoke so much of so much of what's in my mind. You kind of framed it in such a like a in a you organized it for me. You organized it. So breaking this down a little bit, right? What are the mechanics of like turning work into play? Is it making things measurable? How do you deal with accountability? Like, how do we do this?
I think we need to um, codify the mechanics of the game. And this is where I think blockchain and distributed ledger technologies and the systems that are associated with these decentralized technologies that are emerging are absolutely critical. Because the internet brought us these informational systems, and we could share and transmit information really quickly. That's awesome. But when it comes to work, the incentive structures are real. They're tangible and they're important. My reputation when I participate in an ecosystem, and my reputation on LinkedIn, that's important to me, and not because I just want to, for ego's sake or something along those lines. In a food and shelter sense, my reputation is my ability to work in many cases, right?
Mm.
And that's one incentive structure that needs to start to become digitized in a better way than it is today in order to unlock this. And the other thing, breaking it down, that's really important, that blockchain started to kind of open our eyes to, is the transactions. Like some of the problems that exist today in the whole work environment when it comes to like working on really innovative things is we look at what's this massive movement, of the Ubers, the Airbnbs, and the gig economies, and the Upworks and etc. In a highly transactional environment, we can do these transactions, fairly easily and fairly trustfully, on these types of platforms. But if you want to start to bring the philosophies of the gig economy and create that kind of like openness and open marketness to, what they term knowledge work or creative work, or innovative work, it gets hard. And because the structures that are there today are things like equity and investment, right? So as an investor, I invest for rights for future return. As a founder, and ESOP programs, and like you start to get into also employment law. But all of this comes down to the fact that I need to trust that what you say my future reward is, or my salary is, or the bounty is on this piece of work. As you start to break down and atomize the work and want to open it up and make it more of this free market game, then you have to have some backbone that is not controlled by a centralized party, that we can trust to transact on, and know that when I hold a token that says I have a right to future equity on project X because I put some sweat equity in on it, or that I truly have it. And that it can't be taken away from me. And that's where I think the blockchain innovations and ecosystems, one, that they can, create digitally, trusted identities that are backed by this technology, as well as a trusted, disintermediated layer of transaction. We can build on top of that. And you can see even already then they're building on top of it with the decentralized finance protocols, right? Like obviously finance is a big part of what we're talking about here, because we're talking about equity and transactions of something that is representative of a dollar value, if it was salaries or, a commission or whatever it is. You need that backbone. And I think that backbone is emerging in the
Mm.
form of the blockchain and the decentralized identities that it houses as well. And so with that, I think we can start to then break down, well, what are the mechanics of the game? The mechanics of the game can be simple things like, we have an objective or a mission. We start to break down work that we would like to be done. Some of that work could be done on a gig board. Some of that, much of that work is too complex and complicated, or nascent to be understood to be worked on in that way. And so we maybe want it to be a little bit more like tours of duty. This is a conversation that's already been existing in Silicon Valley culture for quite some time. And what if we could start to unlock tours of duty in protocolized arenas where there's templatized agreements and transaction rails, under which investors can come in and play, builders can come in and play, serial entrepreneurs can come in and play, and move around, which is something that a serial entrepreneur often feels friction with. I can play in more diversified ways. I can transact in more dynamic and granular ways, so that it's not like, here's your lump sum of options that vest, and we hope you stick around for 4 years and are as valuable as we think you are. Like I think this is the on ramp, and this is how we break down the problem. Is like, what are the mechanics of the game we're playing? Can we start to do so in a digital way that is trustful? And then from that, it's going to allow us to move faster and more granularly, I believe. And that's going to unlock some pretty interesting variations on the game. And it's akin to, going back to your story of like the teacher who flipped the script a bit,
Yeah.
and took the same objective, which is I want to educate Ravi, and his fellow classmates, uh, and decided to play with the mechanics a little bit and see how the outcomes, emerged. And
Hmm.
I think of these, sort of innovation arenas emerging that are a little bit like these massive multiplayer online games that have sort of mechanics that exist and are codified into the system and they're digitally transacted in a trustful way. But the way in which you show up to play the game and the way in which the game will get played is almost not even predictable. And because of how complex and adaptive it is, that the person who designed the game is effectively also playing the game by trying to respond to the way in which the players play the game. And you just end up with something sort of beautiful and vibrant. And the level of creativity that can emerge from that, I think, is fascinating to me.
Man, this is so fascinating. So this is actually a project that I actually worked on, or trying to do, not at the level of scale that you were. Well, I was at the University of Toronto's Innovation Center, right? So I realized one of the main problems that a lot of startups fail is sales. They're not good at it, right?
Yep.
Like if you look at like a startup, and if you're talking about innovation space and innovating, like you might be really good at your field or solving the problem you're solving, but the issue is you might not be good at accounting. You might not be good at sales. You might not be good at like all the different other things you have to do to get your ideas out there, right?
Yeah.
Now we start like, why do you have to build? Why does everyone who wants to solve a problem have to build a company around it and scale it and do all this when
Yeah.
not everyone is meant, can do that, right?
Yes.
So it actually deters the market. The market selects for people who can actually build these systems rather than just focus on what they do. And a lot of the people who are really good at what they do can't do that. And I saw a lot of people who are like solving like trying to recycle plastics, trying to do like these like amazing projects, leukemia research, trying to commercialize that, like fail
Yeah.
because they might be really good at their profession at what's the solution, but all the other things. So how can we almost like decentralize these companies, so like aspects of the company doesn't have to act inside the company. There's a great concept by Peter Drucker, I think, back in the
Hmm.
60s, wrote a book about the nature of the firm, right?
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Sorry.
I love this idea because he talks about the mechanics of why companies hire internally versus externally. Like, why do
Yes.
you hire somebody? Like, if you look at like a normal worker, like an average worker, they don't, you're actually as a company, overpaying for them because they're not working completely 100%, for you, even during the work hours.
Yep.
Most of the time, what you're really paying for is security, right? You work,
Hmm.
the security of them working in your environment, them being on call when the company needs it, and working within the company infrastructure. And Peter Drucker in the 60s talked about this. It's like there's going to be a point where technology is going to allow that same level of security to be able to function outside of the firm. So just like you would hire an outside firm, you can hire people externally, more freelancers, and atomize the firm a little bit. So the core firm is going to be the core concept people, where everything else is external. One of the
Right.
major cases of this is in finance, right? In the 80s and 90s, the biggest one of the biggest investment firms, I think, was Citibank. Their investment firm, the investors, the investment side of the things, employed about 280,000 people globally, and most of them were just bottom up collecting and doing all this paperwork stuff. That same department is now run by 4 people, right? Because
Yep.
technology has completely flatten that aspect, taking all these aspects of the company and automated parts of it. But the same technologies allow 4 other people to join together and make their own firm, solving the same kind of investment problems they are, and deploy the same kind of solutions. They might not have the same access to capital, but they can perform in the same kind of way. So technology being this great equalizer, that's what it is, right? But more
Yep.
than that, there's ability to like, flatten and make things work outside of the firm, right? External to the firm. And within technology, like there's also an analog to this, right? Like it's becoming more of a catchphrase now. It's like protocols, not platforms,
Yes. Yeah.
right? Right.
Yeah.
So deploying a protocol layer where multiple platforms can work under this one protocol means that, yeah, your solution in-house can operate, but you're operating under a joint protocol. Like one of the best, WebRTC, the IRC programs, and now Matrix.org, another project that I'm following really well, right?
Yep.
Are these protocol layers that now allow, WhatsApp, Slack, all these communities now to like work, to communicate interoperatively, right? So from a
Yep.
WhatsApp chat, now you can talk to a Discord channel, right? And it can work because everyone's working on this protocol layer. And I think about like, how can companies work like that? How can we work like this, right? Where the labor stack, right, is operating on a protocol, right? And then the companies are like platforms that brings them in-house when needed, but have access to a decentralized workforce that they can deploy. And the protocol gives them that trustless atmosphere that the work will get done, the security's there, and the IP is controlled. And like you said, I think the main aspect of this is reputation. If someone screws somebody over, or like if you have a bad actor, you get identified, well, that's going to harm you for a long time, right?
Yep.
So the positive and the pros and cons between doing, being a bad actor is measured by this protocol layer,
Yep. Yeah,
right?
so you're bang on. I mean, and that's exactly it. I think these protocols need to emerge, and these protocols need to emerge to unbundle the firm as per the reference to the Drucker description of the firm, and in order to do so, and one of my friends, Rob Solomon, has talked about this with a project he's worked on called Cone, which is the idea of starting to make the organization feel less like an organization and more like a marketplace of micro enterprises transacting. And so, in terms of protocols, you go look at this, you sort of like, what is the protocol or protocols that will be needed in order to support this? Well, we're going to need something to manage the cap tables digitally in a somewhat decentralized way. We're going to need a way to transact dollars really quickly in this system. We're going to need legal protocols that are digitized, so less paperwork and more contracts that start to actually be fuse the boundaries between what the contract states is going to happen and the transactions that actually happen. So I mean, you take something like an employment agreement, for example, and like, what if your employment agreement also upon execution effectively then starts distributing your salary and equity rewards because the agreement digitally is the contract that governs that. Tickle the contract with the exit clause, and it actually runs the exit protocol. And so, yeah, I think there also is the decision making. How do you make decisions if it's not the manager who makes the decisions? So governance and reference to the serial entrepreneur who's thinking about what does democracy look like when we digitize it. I just think governance and the work that's happening with these decentralized autonomous organizations and all the governance mechanics that are emerging in the blockchain ecosystem, how do we trustfully make a decision and know that it was a legitimate decision? And there will be protocols around that. There'll be protocols around reputation systems. If you look again to the sort of the Ethereum ecosystem, they talk and the blockchain ecosystems, they talk about these decentralized identities and verifiable claims, so that parties could transact on a reputational basis and say, I know Ravi, and Ravi could verify I know Bryan, and then Ravi could also verify that Bryan was on the BX Disruptors podcast. So you see, and then we now have something that is trustfully designated about our reputation in a digital format. And so when you bring some of these protocols together and marry them up, then you can see how this will start to allow work to become digital, and your friend who didn't know how to do sales might be able to more quickly enact, if you're familiar with like slicing of pie methodology for bootstrappers, where when they're in the pre-money state, they're dynamically managing their cap table, and it's just a virtual cap table because it's they haven't had some sort of liquidity event or entry of money. It's just people working on sweat equity.
Mm-hmm.
They could start micro slicing on agreements for commissions for deals bought in, and then get to the liquidity event. Well, now the hard part of doing that is I really got to trust you in the Excel spreadsheet we're managing together about this supposed downstream cap table and event, and know that it's all going to work out. But if that again was on some sort of trusted digital transaction layer or protocol, then like, wow, maybe there will be vibrant arenas, almost like these global remote decentralized venture studios where we can go in and play.
Yeah. So, um, This is something that we're working on currently, right? The idea of like, how do we take the campus environment, especially like the innovation campus environment, and digitize it and creating a
Mm,
federated model where like there's multiple campuses working on different things, but like all under this protocol layer where we can innovate, right? And the innovation is owned by the person, but everything's kind of decentralized, right? Like so, we're currently working on is the communication layer, right? How do we communicate this? How do we find people?
mm,
How do we run all this? And what's really interesting, again, protocols, not platforms, that other people are building the protocols, um,
exactly.
right? And I love this aspect so much because for about 2 years we were trying to build a platform, and the problem with that is that we don't have the product leverage for it. We don't have the greatest product. But when you work on a protocols, you're leveraging the technologies that others are implementing and the governance structures that already exist, and all you're doing is deploying that towards a solution.
Yeah.
But going back to how we can do this for innovation and companies, and going back to again your company, all right, and what you're building, is this meant more for organizations, or is it meant for a decentralized workforce? Is it meant for startups? What
Yeah.
do you envision?
I mean, so we're really pragmatic about the way we approach things at Sobol. So we have this beautiful sort of vision, and we share this vision with many others in the tech ecosystem, particularly the Ethereum blockchain ecosystem, because Sobol is a Mesh XYZ venture under Consensus's portfolio, which is a investment group that Joe Lubin, one of the co-founders of Ethereum, has founded. And so, there's an ecosystem of folks who are building and who are looking at these protocols, and Consensus contributes to protocols. And so, yeah, I think for us, though, to get back to your question, it's like, okay, we're dreaming with others and actually deploying experiments with others, but we have to meet people where they are today too. And so we were like, what's a thing we can start working on if we have this hypothesis that these protocols are emerging and we'd like to be a contributor to them too? But what's going to be needed in the future, but we can use today? And one of the things we realized is that even organizations that are, using today's, hierarchical reporting lines based org structures and functional and divisional structures of a standard firm are recognizing that they're becoming more remote, they're becoming more dynamic because the agile movement has, been with them for a couple of years now, and they're recognizing when, they need to be leaner, they need to be more agile, and then that introduces dynamics. You have to make faster decisions. You will shift roles faster, even in a large scale enterprise. And so and the title and who you report to might not be shifting as quickly, but the number of hats I'm wearing and how I'm showing up and the agreements I'm forming around accountability of what we're taking on, what roles I'm going to play while we're taking it on this project team, on this working group, on this innovation team, on this cross-functional scrum, that's moving, and you start to see these dynamic role marketplaces emerging even within large-scale enterprise with traditional reporting structures. And so Sobol started to become fascinated with the fact that this future needs to be mapped, and the map is more like a graph. Model. We talk about it as hey, maybe they're not flat organizations, they're networked organizations. And so we've been fascinated at Sobol by the atomic units of the organization, no matter
Very
if it's
cool.
this crazy future one or if it's the today's in feeling more decentralized decision making mechanics emerging and more dynamic and agile patterns. And so we were like, what are the atomic units? We got people, we got teams. Those are key, accountability units, because accountability is what drives trust in this organization. And so who I report to is probably not the strongest form of accountability for this highly dynamic organization. Maybe our goals are. The goals are all connected together. OKR
Mm,
theory has been showing that for quite a while, but OKRs still often are very siloed in organizations, and like connecting all the pillars, business drivers, whatever you want to call them, all together across the organization, and allowing that to almost become like dynamic code, allows you to insert, change, move, a hierarchy of objectives, goals, business drivers, and KPIs, and we can start to see a web of accountability of what's driving the business, and then we can watch that the structure is going to move as well. The roles will shift in alignment with what you're trying to do, and so the roles, the team structures, all of that is is going to more rapidly change, and it's going to change in response to that, and it's going to be linked up to that. This team is trying to take on these objectives. This person has decided that they're taking on accountability for this. This role is accountable for these domains and these decision types. And this team has formed an agreement with this team that's an internal services level agreement of how they're going to collaborate to get something done. It's almost like an internal joint venturing. And so mapping all of this and the relationships between all of these people, teams, roles, agreements, goals, starts to kind of map that dynamic accountability. And I believe that that is useful and needed. And we've got customers in large scale enterprise with recognizable names using Sobol to try and solve that problem today. But that same system, that same map, that same ontology is needed when you unlock this decentralized future, and it's more like an open marketplace and not really a firm, or it's people are firms of themselves interacting with firms. So yeah, at Sobol, we're a B2B SaaS app today, working with very progressive consultants in enterprise and SME organizations who are having the challenge of, we're moving quickly, we're making decisions, we're changing our structure, and we're almost like GitHub for your organizational DNA or your accountability graph. And
Yeah.
so that's where we've started, and we've started to think about, okay, how might we start to then leverage governance protocols, decentralized finance protocols, and these other things, smart contracts for employment agreements or sharing agreements or joint venturing, and how might those start to play with Sobol someday in the future, and how might we experiment with those along the way. But that's what we do today, B2B SaaS app, helping teams better map what accountability looks like as you move into a more distributed, remote, and decentralized future.
Man, that sounds beautiful. It's so beyond this elegance, right, of this protocol system that can decentralize and give kind of a different structure for how we do work, and make it more playful, and give us more measurable results. One of the aspects of DeFi also is, like, they talk about, it's like, why do we have to get paid every 2 weeks? Why can't we get paid per day, per hour?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
as I do work, right?
Yeah.
Like, these new models of work is coming to be. And you mentioned this term before, knowledge workers, right? The idea of the information age, right, gave us information workers, which were people who plugged in and used data and systems. But now the machine age is giving us knowledge workers, which are people who build systems, right? So workers who look to, like, not just interact with information, but to build scalable systems. So their output actually increases over time, right? It's a new model of work, and the worry is, just like the railroad worker was automated away by the steam engine, right? By steam devices, just like the factory worker was taken away by automation, and people were forced to become information workers, right? There's going to be a radical shift in the way we think, in the way we do, in the way we educate, right? Do you feel that there's going to be this radical information? This age is dawning upon us, and how quickly are we moving towards it? Are there going to be a lot of people left behind who can catch up?
Yeah. I mean, this is a really important question, and I think my first reaction, I think there's a utopian version and there's a dystopian version of this. And I think it's kind of on us and those who have influence, power, and money to make the decision as to which one they want to participate in. And these types of things, as human systems do, ebb and flow, how things play out in terms of distributions and these types of things. But I think, to that aside, that caveat aside of, like, it could be a utopia, it could be a dystopia, who am I to crystal ball and predict how we will play this? I do believe that there is a shift afoot, that it's already happening, and it's that what we previously called intrapreneurship, and said there are a very select few who will be called to this and have the skills to do it, is rapidly expanding. And the reason is because I think we're saying that an entrepreneur and an entrepreneurial mindset does not necessarily need to be only for those who are the quadruple or the quadruple threat, can sell, can innovate, innovate, knows technology, knows people, and IQ, EQ, like just these anomalies, and it only being for these anomalies. And I think that more and more of these protocols to collaborate are emerging that allow me to have specialization and still be far more entrepreneurial in the nature of which I show up to work and play on this new playing field. And so I think, yeah, there's already a shift afoot to being far more entrepreneurial and unlocking the entrepreneurial capacity that's already existing in the average citizen. When you just look at, Etsy, for example, and what's happening there, and how much more entrepreneurial some of my neighbors are, who are finding things that they enjoy doing and are with these protocols and platforms, finding that they can have access to marketplaces and collaborators who will help lift it up with them. And so that, I think, that's already happening, and I think that will hopefully, if we maintain that kind of like if we maintain a focus on that type of accessibility, and allowing a diverse set of talents and skills and passions to show up to this, and to reduce the barriers to being able to show up and play this new game, then we will probably not end up into a plutocracy, and a super concentrated power law style wealth distribution. We can kind of like smooth that out a little bit, and if we don't, yeah, then we could trend towards some of the dystopias associated with this. But I think that the human system, it being a vibrant system, has a tendency to have a countermeasure to that, and that if we're not cognizant of that, then it just shows up in our economics, in our politics, in our societal communities, in negative ways, and that starts to become a forcing function for correcting it. And so I'm hopeful for the more utopian vision of things, or what some refer to as Game B, where we start to recognize that the ability for all of us to participate, and to better sort of understand that we're in a bit of a closed loop system here called the Earth. Yes, Elon Musk is trying to leave, but we're all here. And if we start to learn how to play a new game of sharing inside of that, then we will also unlock the ability to start to have it feel more like play. These things we're talking about, of like making work more remote and decentralized, means that abundance starts to emerge. I'm no longer afraid of finding my employer locally. I can find my employer globally. The employer is no longer afraid of locking me in at an added cost, because they don't feel there's talent scarcity, even for software developers, because they can go anywhere in the world for great software developers and find them easily through this type of system. And as that abundance comes online, and more mechanisms for abundance come online, again, it starts to feel more and more like play, because we're just pursuing what feels good and fun, because the access to resources and the access to capacity is made so much easier.
Wow. Bryan, this has been amazing. Like our time just kind of flew right by. I feel like I can talk to you for like another few hours about these kind of things. Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you so much for your time. I feel like I learned a lot from you. You condensed a lot of great ideas into very easy to follow tidbits. Yeah. So, Bryan, this has been amazing. I hope we can have you on in 6 months, give some updates into how you evolved and shifted. We love having repetitive guests on the show. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Ravi. It was a lot of fun, and I'd love to do that. I think that would be a lot of fun.
Perfect. Stick around. We'll do a quick debrief. But for everyone who listened in, thank you.